the voice of the relocation industry. I am your host, Ben Cross, and I'm so blessed and honored to be here with my friend Veronica Broomes, founder and CEO of Excel City Apartments. Veronica, how are you doing today?
I'm well, thanks, Ben. Hello, I'm well, thanks, Ben. Hello from Sheffield in South Yorkshire in the UK.
Sheffield.
Yeah,
So
so
tell
I'm
me,
on the
okay,
other side of the pond.
my UKG, okay, I got that much, but my UK geography is terrible. It's abysmal.
Does it
Okay,
stop at
so
London?
well, I barely got to London, to be honest with you. I mean, with Brexit and everything, I don't know what's UK, what's Europe. I don't know what's what. But so where is Sheffield? Where's Sheffield in relation to
Sheffield
London?
is about so Sheffield is in a part of the UK that is called South Yorkshire, and that's in the north of England. So if you're traveling by train, it's about 2.5 hours out of central London, out to King's Cross. And if you're driving, it's probably around 3 hours along the motorway. So Sheffield, that's in South Yorkshire.
Beautiful.
And so
Well,
it's the
thank you for
north.
that.
So if you're talking north-south, it's north. It's north of England, but it's not as far north as Scotland, let's say. So Scotland is much further north.
Okay. All right.
Oh, and
Good to
I
know.
should say it is a university city. And I mentioned that because many decades ago I had attended the University of Sheffield. And there's also another university in the city, Sheffield Hallam University.
So a lot of smart people. So it's like the Cambridge of
No, well, Cambridge may
there's
disagree, but we pride ourselves on being the outdoor city. So that's also good for business because Sheffield is near to an area that's called the Peak District, which is one of the larger national parks, if not the largest national parks in the UK. And we share it with other counties, but we claim part of it in Sheffield.
So I'm okay. So now we're going to go down this parks path here, pun intended. First of all, let us know where you're at in the comments. I want to know, where in the world are you if you're watching today at home or wherever you are. What's your name? Shout out your company. Shout out Veronica. Let us know where in the world you are. We're going to be talking about corporate housing or service apartments, as they say across the pond. We're going to be talking about trends. We're going to be talking about entrepreneurship. I'm going to understand a little bit more about Veronica, her story, and also why she started the company and kind of talk a little bit about trends. I want to hear your questions out there, so feel free to chime in. Veronica, I'm going to the UK for the first time September 6th. I'll arrive September 7th. I'm going to be there for about a week. What do you recommend that I do for my first trip to the UK?
Wow. Welcome in advance, Ben. Because initially I thought it was a rhetorical question, but this is serious. So which part of the UK...
Only serious question of the day, I promise.
Okay, I'll remember that. Which part of the UK are you traveling to?
Well, let's go back to the first thing I said. I only know one thing about the UK. I know London. So I'm going to London. So far it's London.
That's a start. And can I probe further by asking which part of London do you think you'll be going to?
I love this about the Brits are so they ask permission to ask questions, and I love it. It's great.
Sorry.
I will be what part of London? In the inside part.
Central London. Okay.
Yes, I will be within. Yes, correct.
So I'd say if you're in central London, because London is emerging from the lockdowns associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, there are probably some places you ought to see the popular tourist haunts. And if the tour buses are working, I'd say it's worth going on a tour bus because you can do these drop-off, drop-on, or drop-off, step-on, meaning that you can take a tour for X number of hours, and then you can stop off at different points and jump on the next one. Some lines would offer you that, or some of the companies would offer you that. And if you do that, I think that's brilliant rather than you trying to do it on your own, because often there'll be places that you may have more interest in than the others.
I like this.
What I'd say also is worth a visit, and that's probably because I lived in Southeast London for a while. I'd say if you can go to Greenwich, that is worth seeing or being there, because Greenwich is the royal borough of Greenwich, but it's also where you have the observatory, which is where you get that meridian line for Greenwich Mean Time. So it means that you can actually see or walk across that line. That
Are
is
they
there.
are they
Like,
very
well, I
punctual?
should say Greenwich is up a hill. The observatory is up a hill, so you do need to walk with caution.
Okay, I will wear proper shoes, and I will go up the
That's a
hill.
start.
Let,
Yeah.
yeah, let's see here. We got people checking in here. I'd love to know your thoughts if you're checking in. Give me some travel pointers. Janina is so happy to have Veronica with us. Hello from
Thank you,
Brazil.
Janine. Thank you
Look
ever
at
so
that.
much.
Look at that. Tim Quirk. Hello from let's see, Western New York in the house. Hashtag
Hi, Jim.
WNY.
Thanks for
There
saying
you go.
hello. Yes, New York is of interest to me in terms of corporate housing.
Did you know I saw something published by Chippa, and I'm not sure if you're involved with Chippa or not.
I'm not
Corporate
Ben.
Corporate Housing Professionals Association. I want to say
Yeah,
they
I
had a white
understand. I've heard
paper.
the name and I understand it's very much a US entity, but maybe it's global. But at present, I'm not
Yeah,
involved.
yeah. So they had a white paper that was published, and it actually said Rochester, where Tim is located, had like a vacancy rate of 1% or something like that. Very low, very low. So anyway, don't know. Just throwing that little Rochester fact out there. I'm getting a little bit of feedback there from Veronica.
Sorry
Let's
about
see
that.
here.
Is this any better?
Yeah, yeah, sounds good. Let's see here. I don't know how to say this name. Is it
Jacek.
Jacek? Jack?
Yes, Jacek. A regular on Sabbath. Thanks, Jacek. Southampton in the room.
I love it. This is great. We got the Saba folks together.
Yeah, I'm
This
seeing
is
Jamie, Richard. Thanks very
look at
much.
Stacy. You're gonna take my job, Veronica, if you keep reading everybody's name. Stacy checking in. This is great from Pittsburgh. Jamie Massler from Human, Mississippi. Is Mississippi of interest to you? It's okay. You can say
I
no. It's
know
fine.
Jamie. Jamie is a regular attendee at Sabbath as well.
Jamie's awesome. Love Jamie.
Yeah,
Great
yeah,
person.
indeed.
Jamie does
And
a
it
lot
says
of global
humid
corporate housing.
Mississippi. It's always sunny, I thought, Jamie.
Yeah, the sun is implied with the humidity, I think. Richard, there it is. Wagwan to Veronica from London, and Ben, it's Sheffield, known for the city where I studied. It's the Pittsburgh of the UK.
Well, thanks,
Stacy, our
Richard.
producer's laughing. That's funny. That's great, Richard. We're real fond of Saba there. Veronica is spectacular. Looking forward. Richard, in honor of you and your affinity for lexicon, I'm going to ask Veronica, what is the proper name of this industry in your opinion? Because I got to be honest, I've been adjacent to this industry for so long, but I call it corporate housing. But I feel like the more people I talk to, the less I find that that's the appropriate name. So how do you refer to the business that you're in?
I would say I'm in the accommodation business, and accommodation, I think, is a generic term. If you're in the UK, you're more likely to talk about service accommodation because that implies it's shorter stays. It can range from a few days to several weeks or even several months, but it's not the permanent place of residence of whoever it is that's being accommodated. And that has legal implications as well as practical implications. And it's also accommodation that's serviced, meaning that the guests are provided with the basics similar to what they'll have in a hotel in terms of bedding and toiletries. But what's more important is that they have the option to cater for themselves, cook their own meals, and they have a spacious place to stay usually. So I'd say accommodation is an umbrella term, and in the UK, we're more likely to say service apartments or service accommodation. But certainly, I think that it's appropriate in what I hear more often in terms of the US is corporate housing. And I think that's often because you're dealing with people relocating from one place to the next. And it's longer term accommodation. So it's temporary, but it's often more weeks and months rather than just a few days. And there's some people or some providers in the industry who would work only primarily with people who are staying 30 days plus, and often it's because of the implications in terms of the locations they're working in or the jurisdictions. So to answer your question, Ben, the short answer is that it is the temporary accommodation business, but I think the terms used demonstrate or express some of what is implicit with whether it's people relocating or people traveling for leisure or for business.
I like the serviced accommodation because I think that oftentimes we think only of apartments. And I think that our client base is looking for more than just apartments. They're looking for single family homes, townhomes, apart hotels. There's all sorts of different, asset classes in this space. And I think it's interesting to be inclusive. Really, really interesting. Thank you for that breakdown here. Let's see here. We got a bunch of other people checking in. We got Sharon from Houston, Express Corporate Housing in the house. Great.
Yeah,
What's up, Sharon? Misty Stewart from Midland. You from Midland, Misty? What's that from? Friday Night Lights.
Midland, Texas.
Originally a real estate company, but has grown to include corporate housing. Very cool. Kara checking in from Move for Hunger. What's up, Kara?
Hi, Kara.
Richard says I have to go to Manchester.
Sorry, that's City. Football, Ben. British football or English football or European football. It's not American football.
Well, it's okay. I've been watching my Ted Lasso lately. I've been getting up on Ted Lasso, by the way. Do y'all watch that over there? I'm sorry. I'm going off on a
No, sorry. I'm not a football. Richard is the one who's likely to be able to tell you about that. Not Veronica.
I'm gonna write a Ted Lasso column this week. You guys just wait for it. Ben has to visit Big Ben.
Oh yeah, sorry, Jamie. I should have mentioned that. Well, he could see Big Ben along the tour. So Waterloo Bridge area. There's the London Eye, which is near to Big Ben. Big Ben is also where you have the Houses of Parliament, both the elected house and the house that's unelected. So some of it is titled, some of it are people nominated.
Got it. Okay, makes sense. My dad's chiming in. Be sure to wear Bermuda shorts and hang a camera around your neck. He wants me to get
a sign for tourists. But it depends on the time of the year, Dan.
Yeah, Dan. Time of year, Dan. All right. Jack Jampel. Hello, Veronica and Ben from Philly. What's up, Jack? Jack's great. Joe Parteka checking in. Valerie McKenzie here. Richard giving us the Yatsec. Dubai's in the house.
Sorry, apologies.
Yep, very good. And let's see, Richard, I'd love to know, Richard, what you're seeing from a trend standpoint. I'd love to hear your questions also for Veronica, since you were kind of the one that brought us together. But Veronica, so we're talking a little bit about this industry and all the various names, but what got you into this business in the first place? I'm really fascinated to hear, people's stories about how they got into service
accommodations. Thanks for the opportunity to share that, Ben, because in fact, when I started the current company, it was in 2015. And at that time, I was not looking to be involved in hospitality or accommodation. I was simply looking to be involved in a property business. And I think we say property in the UK, in the US, you'll talk about real estate. It's the same thing, just different term. But I was looking to develop a business that required less of me selling time and knowledge and being able to leverage more my time, knowledge, and transferable skills. And so when I started this business, it was in essence to use my research skills to assist people who were too busy, high net worth individuals, but just too busy to do some of the property finding for themselves. But what I soon realized is that could be a business that has too high risks because there are several moving parts that are outside my control. And the process is lengthy. So I needed to find a way in which I can use the basis of the business, but to have a more organized system within that business that would allow for the business to cash flow. And because previously I'd hosted people, so I understood the hospitality part of it. I do like traveling. And it means that I thought, what I could be doing then is to look at an entry point that would allow me to combine some of that skill, some of that knowledge, and to be able to work in what is called the service accommodation business in the UK. Now, at that time, I actually lived in London.
I want to interject a couple things. Things because as you're speaking, I'm having all these thoughts here. The first being that, you wanted to get away from kind of selling your time and expertise. And I just heard a Warren Buffett quote this week, and he said, if you don't find a way to make money while you sleep, you will work until you die.
Indeed.
And I
And
found that to be so profound. And
you're spot on, Ben, because that's what I needed to do. I needed to find a way in which I can generate income whilst I'm sleeping. If you're in the knowledge business and you're selling online courses, yes, you can do that. But if you're only selling your time, you're doing consultancies or you're doing anything that requires you to be present to deliver, you indeed will work until you die, unless you have a windfall that allows you to have that pension pot. In my case, that didn't apply. So the hospitality or accommodation business was my way of doing that.
And then you said that you were working with high net worth individuals who didn't have the time or the, whatever prerogative to go out and source their own accommodations. But you said that there was risk in there and there were factors outside of your control. I'm out of curiosity, what were some of those factors?
Yeah, if I could just clarify that, these were not high net worth individuals that were looking for accommodation. They were more or less looking for properties that they'll invest in. So it wasn't as a private accommodation provider. It was in the context of the UK, the property business, property investment business, property finding service. And in the context of the US, it would be the real estate market, but not as a real estate agent, more in the role of a consultant that serves as a broker. So it's from that perspective. So accommodation came later. And in fact, I started the business in 2015. I registered a company in 2015 and started that initial support and preparation for trading. But then when 2017 was when I realized, along with my then business partner, that we needed to do something different. And because at that time I was living in London, London was not ideal for any number of reasons to start that business. And so I wanted to be somewhere outside of London, but because I had most of my friends living in London, it wasn't an easy decision to make, but I had to make a business decision. It was in the interest of the business that we were relocated somewhere else. And so I started thinking of cities outside of London, initially within an hour's travel, but that wasn't practical. And so I returned to Sheffield, and I use return deliberately because I'd actually studied in Sheffield many decades ago and hadn't envisaged that I would have returned to the city to conduct business. But there we are. So 2017, and I'm still here. And over that time, we would have started working with estate agents and landlords, estate agents being the equivalent of your real estate brokers and realtors, to have properties that we can manage, or to find for companies who are offering a similar service to us, which is providing temporary housing for people who are traveling for business or leisure.
So I want to go back to kind of the beginning moment here, because there's so many people out there during this COVID and post-COVID, or maybe we're still in COVID kind of time period, where people are making so many transitions and entrepreneurship is on the table for so many people. Right. And so many people are listening to your story and they're thinking about themselves and making a jump. Right. I made one last year and it's been great. And I want to bring it back to, what was that moment when you knew that you had a business, when you knew that this was going to actually be successful?
I hadn't thought of that question, Ben. So if I'm to reflect the moment I knew I had a business, I think I would say when I got the first reservation for accommodation, because we'd already secured the first property. So within the first month of being in Sheffield, we had gotten the first property. So we knew we had a property, we had staged it, we had it ready, we had a product ready to offer us temporary accommodation. But our focus then was not on business travel. So it was more or less leisure. Sorry, yeah, it wasn't business, it was leisure guests. And so when we got the first booking, and I distinctly remember the first guest who arrived from Glasgow in Scotland and came to Sheffield for a football match. I was just amazed, because not being a football fan, I couldn't imagine that someone would have traveled several hours to show up in Sheffield for a one-day football match, but was coming for 2 nights. in order to be there the first night and then to see his team play and then to travel back after 2 nights. And I thought, incredible. So that's when I thought, well, yes, if people are traveling for that, there may be other people who are traveling for other reasons that are linked with leisure. Now, we've had several guests that we've accommodated for sporting events in Sheffield, and I did say Sheffield was the outdoor city, but we have both indoor and outdoor events. But we also would have had people who've traveled, or we've accommodated for relocation, for business travel, for
Right.
attachments or fellowships, so it varies.
It's interesting because you're talking about, it would have never occurred to you that someone would come out of the country to visit, for a football game for 2 nights. And I think that's one thing I would tell, entrepreneurs out there, because as they think about starting a business, they think of all the reasons why something won't work, but they don't often consider all the reasons why it will work. And there's so many more opportunities out there than you can even wrap your mind around, because so many people think and act differently and have different budgets and different economics than we do in our present moment. So oftentimes we get really small-minded and we forget the opportunities that are out there. But one other thing that you're talking about, so then you grew from having this person who just came in and rented for the first time to then going into all these kind of other verticals and other areas. How did you scale the business? And I want to hear questions from the audience, because the audience is putting questions in here, and we're going to get to all your questions. So keep putting your questions in there. Yes, Jamie, I know she means soccer. We're going to go along with it, even though it's an American pro. Yes, Jamie, thank you for translating. I appreciate that, Coach Lasso.
Thanks, Jamie.
But how did you scale that into then relocation and other corporate types of business?
I'd say serendipity. I wanted to say by accident, but I'd say serendipity is something I've subscribed to over the years, meaning fortuitous good luck. When you have your sight in a particular direction, so you have an end point or an end goal or an aim, it means that you're taking all actions to reach that. But it could be that you're so narrow in your focus that you're only looking that way, that you don't see the opportunities in the wings. And it was one of those. So it meant that what I've also learned over the years, so I had run another business previously, that it was a service-based business. And I remember when I spoke with one of my earlier mentors, and because it was training and I'd started with a particular set of courses, she said to me, Veronica, you need to stop saying you don't do this and to ask, when would you like to have it and how can we help? Because it moved me away from thinking that I only had the resources within the business and therefore I could only service these particular needs of clients, when in fact, what I needed to do was to reverse that and to think differently, to say, if the client needs this, how can I provide it? And so I think that helped me with the accommodation business.
So how did you find relocation? Did it find you? How were you first exposed to corporate relocation as a service vertical or industry?
What I'd say is that corporate, or not corporate relocation, but relocation can straddle different areas. So in my case, it's not businesses or corporates that have approached me to say the people are moving, but in fact, it's the individuals who are moving. So for example, I would have had sometime last year, we had a medical professional who was moving internally. So he was moving from one part of the UK to another part of the UK to take up a hospital appointment. And because that move was happening without his family initially, he needed somewhere temporarily so that he can have a presence, be close to his work, and then look around for his longer term accommodation so that the family could move. We've also had people who are relocating to Sheffield because they're coming to study. And most postgraduate students, or not most, I should say many postgraduate students who are coming from overseas to study for 3 years plus would tend to come with family members, because it means that they need to be thinking about the children in school and the partner either at work or at home. And because of that, they will come and spend a few weeks, before they move into their permanent or longer term accommodation. And then more recently, we've had families who've been moving from Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is that part of the world where the UK has always had a link. And I think it's just over 25 years ago that they were returned, the province was returned to China as having control. And there were some issues, or there's still some issues in terms of that relationship. And because of that, the UK government has said that eligible Hong Kongers can come to the UK. There's a pathway to residency and living. And so we've been fortunate to have supported or have families coming from Hong Kong, a few at this stage, but we would have been able to facilitate that accommodation by providing temporary accommodation.
Now, do most of these families find you by happenstance, search, word of mouth, or do you have contracts with companies directly or relocation management companies?
Initially, it started off by accident. They found us, but we're in the stage where we're actively nurturing those connections with people who can direct more people who are looking for accommodation. Because many of the people who travel actually are young families, and therefore it means that in the early stages that secure, comfortable accommodation is so important as they look around for longer term accommodation. So it is in the pipeline, or it's now being nurtured and developed to be able to work with agents that are actually, or companies that are actually working with those families. The initial research suggests so far that it doesn't seem as if they're businesses that are relocating staff, and so it's more individuals that are making decisions about when families move and where. So Sheffield is just one of the cities in the UK, and so far London and Manchester have proven to be the more popular ones, so people who are relocating from Hong Kong.
This is really interesting. I'm always fascinated by people who kind of, you said it was accidental, kind of almost luck into this industry, or find it by accident or happenstance, and then discover this whole enormous kind of infrastructure and industry and conferences and thought leadership, and they find that they see this little kind of speck of light, and they kind of scratch away at it, and then all of a sudden, like, there's this enormous opportunity. And I find that so interesting, and that's so exciting for these companies, because you've made it so far kind of by word of mouth and organically, and then to find out, wow, there's this enormous infrastructure that you can tap into with all these agents and relocation management companies.
You're spot on with that, Ben. So thanks very much for that observation, because when I hear you talking about relocation, I'm thinking, wow, that's huge. And we, as accommodation providers, we see just one aspect of it.
And what's interesting though too is, and this is really for everybody that's watching this right now, I want you to take notice, because there's so many companies that are finding their footing due to the dispersed nature of relocation and assignments through lump sum and employee choice, and whatever catchphrase we want to use now. Employees are going out and they're sourcing a lot of their own accommodations, and so they're finding companies like Veronica's company, Excel City Apartments, and many other companies that we've talked about on the show and that haven't been on the show, and folks are finding their foothold, while legacy providers who have had huge amounts of business through a lot of these channels for years, their business is being is going, I won't say going away, but it's changing. And a big portion of that business is no longer directed and managed. It's more fragmented. So it's really interesting. And I have so much excitement for you and your journey, because if you can be successful by accident, think about how, now that you're uncovering all these things, it's just going to get really crazy. So Veronica, I have to know, and keep the questions and the comments coming. We're going to go through those here in just a moment. But Veronica, I have to know, so tell me a little bit about your company. How big are you? How many apartments and all of that good stuff? Give us an idea of the scope and scale.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for that question. Can I just clarify? It hasn't been all accident, Ben. There's a
I'm,
lot of hard work and long days that have
I'm
gone
sorry.
into that. Just in case
I'm so
everyone was
sorry.
thinking, I'm
I'm
just
sorry.
sitting, Veronica just sits and waits for an accident
Just
or a
sits,
few
the phone just
accidents.
keeps ringing and she doesn't even do anything. No, I'm just kidding,
Sorry,
Veronica. I didn't
yeah,
mean that.
no,
I
it's not
apologize.
only accident, but
I
which is why I
apologize.
use the word serendipity. And you probably have heard
Mm,
the same from one of your founders in the US who's spoken about, I found that the harder I work, the luckier I become.
there
And
you
you
go.
probably know that famous quote.
Hmm.
So, in terms of, I'd like to think that we're a boutique business. And so it's not about large numbers. Whilst we do work in partnership with other companies, and at one time we would have had access to less than 10 apartments, in fact, just around 5 apartments. At present, we have just 2 units in the same building. And the reason for that is that we're looking to consolidate. So, whereas previously we had several locations, now we're not looking to grow necessarily by multiple locations in Sheffield. We're looking to grow internationally, but using a different business model. So, the business model that is being used in Sheffield is not one that we'll replicate elsewhere. But in Sheffield, our focus is very much on having multiple units in the same building, but it means that what we need to do in order to achieve that is to nurture and strengthen those relationships with both landlords as well as estate agents and learn how to develop, and as yet we're not at that stage, to develop the relationships with developers. So I do follow what's happening in terms of the developers and the developments and the planning approvals that are coming to Sheffield. But we're at the stage where I do have someone, I'm working in association with someone who would provide or who provides business development support to make those connections with the developers. Because if you're a boutique business, if you're a small business, it means that not all your resources are internal to the business. They're resources that are outsourced and they're resources that you can use virtually. So, for example, the support that we get through marketing and our social media is actually done with someone who's working out of the Philippines. And over for a number of years, I've worked with different contractors from the Philippines, but it means that I recognize that I can increase my capacity. The business can increase the hours that we're serving people by ensuring that we're not just a 9 to 5 business, that we can be available online as well as people can communicate with us offline.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's important these days. People want a response no matter where they are and whatever time they're reaching out, especially if they are a relocating employee who's trying to get their keys to get into to the building.
Yes, that can be an issue. In fact, today we've had someone who's just checked into one of our properties who will be there for just under a couple of weeks. But that's someone who's coming to work on an education project in Sheffield. And we do provide the information in terms of how you access the property very close to arrival time, not the details in terms of where you go, but how you can do a self check-in. And essential to that is actually having a cell number, as you would say, or as we would say in the UK, a mobile phone for that person. So if you're making a booking and you don't have a valid mobile phone, we need to speak with you to find an alternative way of communicating with you, because security is important for us and being able to ensure the safety of our guests and other residents in the building. And therefore, we wouldn't have someone who's checking into our properties that we have no way of communicating with apart from email and online, because for safety, for security, as well as safety reasons, we need to reach you.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. We got some great comments coming in here. Let's keep those questions coming. I want to hear all your questions for Veronica, your comments, your observations here. We've got people coming in. Nina Taylor. What's up, Nina? I
Hi,
can't wait
Nina.
till your company books in New York City. Are there any other locations in the U.S. you want to expand into? Veronica,
Thanks for
what are your
that question,
thoughts?
Nina. Brilliant question. I'd say Houston or Texas would not be one of those, because I know Texas is Nina's territory. But we're certainly interested in New Jersey as well as Florida.
All right. Now, why, may I ask why in New Jersey and
New
Florida
Jersey,
particularly?
because it's linked with New York and prices, because of the fact that for some people who are moving or looking for accommodation in New York, they may not be able to afford the prices in New York, but their adjacent areas in New Jersey, the border states that they'll be able to live in and do a quick commute to New York. So that's part of the reason. In terms of Miami, there's some people who are looking for places that are warmer and not necessarily for the East Coast. And I understand that there's a lot of growth in Miami because it's being labeled now the second Silicon Valley. This is what I've heard. So it means that lots of people are heading in that direction. And therefore, if they are, it means that their accommodation needs to be provided. And actually, just over the weekend, I was speaking with someone who does operate a corporate housing business, an early startup that is in Florida. And the person was explaining that there's some locations where there's not enough temporary accommodation, and maybe there are not even enough hotels, because there's some areas that, whilst there may be people moving to them, they don't necessarily have the appropriate infrastructure in terms of accommodation types at present.
Now, if you were to do something in New Jersey and let's say Miami, just for conversation, would you take leases there, or would you work through partners who have properties?
The second part of it, because as I said, the model for the UK growth of the business is very different from the model that would be used for the US part of the business. And what I've also learned over the years is that it's so important to work in partnership. It's so important to build those relationships and work with trusted third parties, as against thinking that you need to build every house or you need to keep every fire going. You need to have
I
trusted
agree.
partners that your clients can trust you to provide.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. I think that's what I would do as well. Jamie has a question. Do you think the VAT increasing in the next few months in the UK will have a major impact to business and overhead costs?
Brilliant question, Jamie. I'd say in terms of overhead costs, those will increase automatically. The question would be whether those or how those are passed on to end users. And I think only time will tell, because UK businesses, whilst you may be charging the guests, as a business, you offset VAT costs, because if you're claiming VAT and you're remitting VAT, it means that the difference is what you need to remit to the tax authorities, HMRC or Majesty's Tax and Revenue Service. But it's a question of what happens with the price to guests. Now, I think because I know because this business is seasonal, or it used to be pre 23rd of March 2020, and we all know what happened after. It used to be seasonal, so you could have predicted that you were going into the winter, and therefore you're likely to have more business bookings rather than leisure bookings. I think we're yet to see what will happen come 2021, 2022. So, Jamie, I don't know whether it will have a major impact. No doubt it will have an impact on overhead costs, but in terms of the end user, I think we'll need to wait and see.
So yeah, it sounds like it's mostly a pass through. But Jamie follows it up with a question about demand. Do you think it'll affect demand? Do you think this increase will affect the lengths of stay within businesses for the UK?
I think it depends on the type of business, because if you're dealing with, let's say it's a business that has a building or a construction aspect to it, that I think will not be affected by the VAT, because it means that people need to get the work done. If you're coming as an IT contractor from a corporate, and we've had IT contractors coming from, let's say, mainland Europe, and they're working in a part of an area near to the Sheffield city centre, and they're working on a project, the length of stay is not dependent on the cost of stay. The length of stay is dependent on the work. So if they have a program of work that they need to deliver, they need to spend X number of weeks here before having X number of weeks off in their home country. My view is that will continue. So it very much depends on the sector. Although having said that, I've heard that there's some people who are of the view that businesses, especially larger businesses, are more likely to encourage longer stays rather than having employees making several shorter trips. That's good for the environment, I know, and it could be good for business as well. But I think it's very much it depends on what sector people are working in.
Yeah, and I think Jamie's point might also be that if the serviced accommodation costs can, rise for whatever reason, do businesses start to determine that it's no longer, feasible or they can't justify the expense of sending people, especially when you have alternatives, such as virtual meetings and things like that. But I'm seeing a lot of studies and anecdotal evidence to support actually more in-person things. So, and we're going to talk about the environmental impact because I know that's near and dear to your heart. We have another question here as well from Heather. Always curious, as I work at a language company, shout out Heather Jameson, Global LT. Are you bilingual? Always a fun topic.
Indeed. At one time, I would have said that I speak enough Spanish to get by, but I haven't had cause to practice my Spanish recently. And I learned Spanish in high school, and then I used it when I was working in agricultural research occasionally, and I could have read papers. But Heather, thanks to your question, I wouldn't say that I'm bilingual, but what I would say is that within the business and some of our suppliers, we do have people who speak more than one language.
Yeah, I think it's great for business when you can, right? I mean, it's just an extra skill for sure.
It is.
Richard says, good point, Jamie, because VAT drops after 28 days. Oh, interesting.
Oh, yes.
Interesting.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Richard, for pointing that out in the hospitality business. Yes. And it did go to 5% because of the support government provided. No, it drops it to 5%, but I think it did go to less than 5 on a temporary basis because of the support that the UK government provided to businesses as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes, that is very topical. And this is, Aaron says, Aaron, I love this comment. Aaron, okay, so I love that you just said Her Majesty and it was totally normal. I mean, we Americans never get to say that. Just doesn't ever enter into our daily conversation. Aaron, I was just thinking the same exact thing. And just Her Majesty's Revenue Service just rolled off the tongue. I want to, now that I have my own company, I want to name my accounts receivable department His Majesty's Revenue Service. So if we could just start putting that on the bills that go out, His Majesty's Revenue Service, I think that. Tim, what do you think? Is that too ostentatious or just right? Okay, wonderful. Just right, he says.
Ben, that's hilarious. The reason I said Her Majesty's that I figured if I said HMRC, some people will be trying to figure, what on earth is that?
I'm like, HSBC, what does that have to do with anything?
Authorities, and then I said HMRC, I needed to say, well, it was Her Majesty's Revenue.
It's fine. Yeah. We're learning how to speak. We're learning how to speak British over here. We're all becoming multilingual. No,
you guys are doing quite well. I know I can't speak American, but I do understand it.
This is great. Henri, you're not in Bordeaux? What is going on? You got to let me know. Mike Falia checking in from California a little late. That's all good.
Hey, Michael.
No worries. Let's see here. Richard's got a question too. Richard's questions are great. They're always all over the place. Richard, is it really possible to make money when you sleep? Because if it is, I'm hitting the sack right now, and I should be rich tomorrow. You will be. You'll be rich. You'll be richer. But is passive income really possible? Because service accommodation is hard work. You don't just luck into a nice business like this, Veronica, I'm told.
It is indeed. And I did say to you, Ben, I wasn't waiting around for accidents to happen. I do put in the hard work, but I think it's passive from the perspective that I would get requests for accommodation that can be processed whilst I'm sleeping. And I can get up the next morning, or somebody else can look at and respond to that message. So it means that it is possible to make that money when you're sleeping, but then it is hard work in terms of ensuring that you have the right team in place and you have the right systems. Because if your guests, if the clients you're working with don't have a positive experience, it means that there is a negative effect on the business. And it doesn't mean that it's always, in my experience, that it's always 100% correct every time. But what's so important is when there are any mistakes or errors or gaps, is that those are acknowledged and remedied rather than considering them as part of the delivery. So, Richard, to answer your question, yes, it is possible to make money when you sleep, but yes, you do need to work hard when you're awake. So I wouldn't
There you
suggest you
go.
hit the sack right now.
Well, everybody that watches the show knows this is actually Richard's dinner time. And Richard, I hope
He's
you don't miss
missing
dinner,
dinner.
but I do love your company. Richard, I would also say that any kind of real estate where you get a mortgage payment or you get a rent payment or you get some sort of a monthly payment, even if you're in consulting and you're not charging by the hour, but you're actually charging on a flat rate per month, these are really good things because you just wake up some days and you forgot about it and then it hits your bank account and it's like, wow, I feel really good today. So there's that. Richard says, Veronica, so Sheffield's being UK's steel city. Are the steelworks still generating demand for accommodation, or has that totally changed? I've been away a long time.
Richard, you have been away a long time. I know you have personal and professional links with Sheffield, but as you know, Sheffield is still recognized as UK's steel city, but that's not a major part of the economy. So Sheffield, I spoke about Sheffield being the outdoor city, and Sheffield is also well known for the digital economy that is growing. There's a regeneration or transformation in terms of infrastructure. And there also, Sheffield has the international or an Olympic sized swimming pool. And pre-COVID, that attracted many people because we hosted many families coming to Sheffield for swimming because they'll come either weekends, long weekends, or they'll come during summer when they're longer term events. We've even had people coming from Germany. We once had they weren't trainers, they were people who refereed. There were two referees who were coming for a water polo competition. And it was actually the first time that I knew that the pool also accommodated water polo. So I'd say that Sheffield has not lost its title as the Steel City, but the steelworks, many of the units are actually now being converted. Well, not the units, but many of the buildings that used to be part of older and historical Sheffield are actually being reconfigured and refurbished. So some of those are coming out as mixed-use units, where you'll have a combination of residential as well as commercial properties or commercial units. And I can think of one that's called Cutlery Works that comes to mind, which is in an area Sheffield is known as Kellam Island. And in that, you have lots of food businesses that actually are found there. So some of the works are being converted, or some of those previous steel works buildings have been converted into other class of uses or land use, commercial use classes.
So, I think that's actually an interesting segue when we talk about kind of evolution, innovation, progress, change. One of the biggest trends right now that I'm hearing about, I'm starting to hear about, is ESG. And I think it's very big over there in Europe. And I wanted to know what your thoughts were. We have Richard here says, Veronica, we know you as someone very much behind promoting a sustainable sector. Can you say a little about that?
You must have read his thoughts, Ben.
Veronica, you there? I think it just broke up just a bit.
You asked about ESG, and I'd love to talk a little bit about that. So, as I understand, ESG is usually used to refer to the environmental, social, and governance aspects of what is considered in businesses. And often this is from an investor perspective. So you said then that maybe it's big in the UK. I would say the North America also has a significant interest and application of ESG, environment, social, and governance issues. And the environmental aspect, I think, is fairly straightforward. It has to do with how people deal with the planet and whether it's how they look at energy or they look at how they manage waste, or they look at travel. It deals with aspects that are also popular in terms of climate change. The social is, of course, about people, and that's both internal and external. So the customers, stakeholders, investors, employees. So I think the environmental and social aspects are quite known to many people. But it's when those two are combined with the governance that I think would often leave people confused and perplexed as to exactly what that means. And I'd say that the governance aspect is often linked with accountability, and it's linked with companies that where the people who are the directors, the people who may be trustees, the people who may be advisors and are sitting on boards of companies need to be thinking, are those boards equipped with the appropriate skill set or expertise to make the most informed decisions on behalf of the business for today as well as for the future? So, for example, if on your board you tend to have people who maybe have strong skills on finance and budgeting and HR and logistics, possibly, and they know very little about social impacts or the environment or carbon budgeting, it means that you're at risk that you could be left behind as a company. Or your investment could be at risk if you find that you're investing in businesses that may be harmful to people, to the planet, and therefore you could be affected if you're a company that's listed and trading, and it means that your shares will drop. Now, I remember maybe it's about a couple of years now, I was invited to moderate a panel on ESG, and interestingly enough, they were people from North America. No one, I was the only person from the UK, and I was moderating the panel rather than being an expert in contributing. And the point that was being made by many of the people who were involved in the funds and taking people's money to invest is that one of the key points that was being made is that people were looking at de-risking their investments for carbon. And by that, they meant, well, carbon and other negative or adverse indicators. And by that, they meant that what they didn't want to find is that they were investing in projects that maybe had high levels of carbon emissions. And therefore, if they continued investing in those projects, there was a possibility that they could be losing money. So coal fires, for example. And so the point that they were making is that they need to think carefully about where they spend their investors' money and what they put it in. And it's so important when people have pension plans. Now, that's a lengthy answer I've given, but I'm hoping that it does provide some insight into some of the implications for ESG. And I should give a shout out to Richard, because Richard had asked me to be part of a panel he had recently with the Blue Room. And there we spoke about sustainability and the service accommodation corporate housing sector, but less so from the perspective of the governance, the ESG, and more about the people, profit, and planet aspect of sustainability.
Yeah, this is really a fascinating topic, and obviously this could take up a whole hour's discussion. But I want to drive it home for people and make it real and maybe more practical and tactical. What can we do as a relocation industry and a service accommodations industry to be more sustainable?
I'd say first we need to look at what we're doing now, because there's a lot we take for granted that we're already doing, but we don't recognize that. And often I use the simple example that we tend to do in the UK, which is that you no longer print every email that you receive. Now, I've been around long enough to know the time when we started receiving email messages. So it wasn't always there, but suddenly you have lots of people writing to you across the internet. And you used to have these messages and you felt you needed to print them to keep a record and you store them somewhere. Now that no longer happens. Now, as a result of that, just no longer printing, what it means is that you're saving tons of paper every year because you're no longer buying the amount or the volume of stationery that you bought previously. and therefore you have more money in your pocket as a business. Now you can choose how you use that money. But I think I usually would say do an initial audit, do an initial check of what it is that you're already doing. Identify a few areas that you're doing well in those, and talk about those. Also identify the areas that you think you can do more, but you just don't know what to do or where to start. And there I can say you can look for help, or you can ask for some help. And there are people who would do this as a business, so they can offer you that guidance. I tend to do sustainability audits that people can do themselves. So I call them the self-guided audits. So when I provide that service, but that's my other hat that I wear. But I'd say begin with acknowledge what you're doing now, then look at what you can do to improve, and then repeat that. So repeat that every year. It also helps if you have something like a policy on sustainability, for example, and recognize that sustainability, when you talk about sustainability, you're talking about the economic, the profit part of your business. You're talking about the social, the people part of your business. And this would be your stakeholders, your employees, your customers, your clients, whoever else that you engage with. And then also remember the environment. So the environmental part of it is what has to do with the planet. So if you think about the three as a joined up way of thinking, I think you're well on your way to making that first start. But I do encourage people not to feel, or businesses, not to feel that overwhelmed that leads to paralysis. Because we're thinking, oh, well, there's so much to be done, I could possibly do all of it. No, no one could possibly do all of it, but you can begin to take simple actions.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. It gives me a lot to think about as I prepare for all my flights everywhere. Somebody pointed out to me, he's like, Ben, why don't you stop flying everywhere? And why don't you just like do a Zoom call or something like that? I said, well, I feel like I've built up a year and a half of Zoom calls and stuff. I feel like I'm just spending some of those carbon credits that I've amassed. But no, I mean, it's a valid point. It's a valid point.
It's being aware. Yeah. Aware is a start. Yeah.
We have, we're running out of time, but Jamie's got a great question. I just have to ask this question here. Well, Rich is saying, great show, Veronica. We love her back home. She's her Majesty friend.
Oh, Richard is having a field day, isn't he?
Richard, send some money to Veronica's Majesty's revenue service as well.
Thanks.
Go ahead and Venmo
man.
something. Jamie says, do you feel the OTAs disrupt your inventory for longer corporate stays? I've heard that a lot of UK providers are changing models to handle more longer corporate stays, going away from OTAs.
You're spot on, Jamie, but I'd say that that's not a new issue. That's an issue that had been happening pre-pandemic, where, and this is where I think providers in the UK actually have worked together, some groups. And by this, I mean, if, for example, someone has an OTA booking for a shorter stay and a longer stay comes in, that person is likely to be checking with others who may have inventory nearby to see how best they can relocate. But there are times when it's not possible or practical to do that. So yes, there are those implications, but I think it helps when you have other units that you can access, because it means you can provide a solution or a service to your guests, but it doesn't mean that you miss out on the longer corporate stays. Not in every instance it works out that way. There are times when you do have to say no, because you couldn't possibly shift the shorter stays. But I think certainly working with longer stays is certainly the way to go, and many operators are looking to move that way increasingly.
Yeah, interesting. Really interesting. Well, this has been an insightful conversation with another wonderful entrepreneur. And Veronica, I want to ask you, do you have just another couple minutes for us to do a top 5?
I could, Ben. I think
that's music to my ears.
So let's go.
Veronica, don't even worry about it. I'm absolutely positive the super producer Stacy has prepared a top 5 called your top 5 favorite books. Yeah. Look at this. Shout out to Stacy Huff. She's the bomb.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you ever so much.
Yes.
All your hard work behind the scenes and
seriously
in preparation for the show.
This show was no accident. She did not, we did not just luck into this just amazing
Oh, I know
success that we
that.
are having here.
Yep.
A lot of hard work. Only when Stacey's awake is she working hard, though. So let's start with number 5. What's number 5?
The Road Less Traveled by Scott M. Peck. And my reason for choosing that is that in a previous life, I used to be salaried and I worked in research, agricultural research, and I left that at some point and became an independent and freelance consultant. And because I knew I was leaving the familiar to go into the unfamiliar, I needed to make some changes around my thinking. And that was one of the books that helped me, because it helped me to recognize that with different relationships you have, you need at some times, if they become draining, to be able to step aside, to walk away, to leave. And it was a road less traveled. That what I was doing was not the norm. And this was many years ago. So Scott M. Peck was one of those. I've read other books that he's written, but this one stands out for me, The Road Less Traveled. And as an entrepreneur, we're often on that road.
I remember this book. My mom had this book. I remember this book. This book was written a while ago.
Sorry, Ben. A lot of those I'm speaking about were written a while ago.
No, it's good. It's good. No, it's good. My favorite book is How to Win Friends and Influence People, which was written in 1934.
Oh yeah, that was even much longer.
Yeah, and the Bible's kind of old too. No, old books are great books. I just remember this one because we talk a lot about. There's a lot of this kind of thinking now, and it seemed kind of almost before its time back then because. It seemed like there was only one of a few, maybe. Number 4.
Unbowed this is Wangari Maathai, and maybe an unfamiliar name for many people. But the reason I've chosen this is that she's passed away now, but she was a Nobel Prize winner. And this was a woman from Kenya, an academic, a political activist, a mother, a wife. And despite that, she was still able to encourage thousands of people, thousands of women, if not hundreds of thousands, to plant trees in Kenya. And so an incredible life story. And I actually had the privilege of listening to her when she was on a tour. Well, she had visited the UK. And I remember going to listen to her speak at an area near to Trafalgar Square. Yeah, you should go to Trafalgar Square when you're in London, Ben. So
okay. All right. This is lovely. So they planted trees in Kenya or around the world?
Yeah, in Kenya. That's where she was living. Incredible story. But in essence, it was the green tree or tree planting movement that she initiated. So she got just ordinary women to plant trees to help with improving the soil and the forests that they had in Kenya. So this is ages ago that this started, but it was one of those lesser known initiatives. And I only learned of her. Maybe she already had been a Nobel laureate then, but I learned of her because this event was listed at an organization that I used to go to their events when they had this members club near to Trafalgar Square. And I thought, oh yeah, I'd be interested in hearing that, and then learned of this woman's incredible journey.
Beautiful. Love it. Number 3.
Another old one, but popular one. Stephen Covey.
This is a classic. This is a classic right here.
7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I don't know which number it is, but one of my favorites is Begin with the End in Mind. Because I find that is so important. If we have a sense as to where we're looking to get to, we then work backwards to get there. If we start with where we are now and then start thinking, oh, we'd like to get to a particular point, we don't always understand the steps. But if we begin with the end in mind, we can then work backwards to where we are now and think about what adjustments we may need to make. So 7 Habits of Highly Effective People used to be one of my popular ones. I even had the condensed one you could check off whichever habit you're looking at every day or every week. So yeah, Stephen Covey.
A classic right there. Number 2.
Well, this is an American, Maya Angelou, another deceased person. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And I first discovered her maybe about 20 years actually after she had written this book. And at that time, I was a postgrad student in Sheffield, the University of Sheffield. And I remember going into this bookshop on West Street and seeing this book, and I'm thinking, the cage bird sings, a strange name. But then when I read the summary, I thought, oh, this is interesting. Her books, I've read the series that she had speaking about herself, and then I also got her one of her anthology of poems, a song sung up to heaven, flung up to heaven. And I remember that one distinctly because I was visiting some relatives in Maryland, Washington, D.C., and I actually got a cousin to buy me the anthology. So, an incredible woman, a life that seems like a fairy tale, but it's just how much she's achieved or how much she had achieved through her life journey. And she portrayed the determination of women to succeed.
Maya Angelou just had so much power when she spoke and when she wrote. She was just such one of those people who could just speak and there's just power in her voice. I read one of my son's favorite books is it's a poem actually by Maya Angelou and it's set to Jean-Michel Basquiat art. And it's I'm Not Afraid of the Dark is what it's called, you know, and it's really interesting. And so my son who's 3 knows who Maya Angelou is, or at least a little bit.
Oh,
But
I am
one of the
impressed, Ben.
one of the most powerful things, thank you. One of the most powerful pieces of advertising that I can remember is Apple's commercial using Maya Angelou's poem, "We are more alike than unalike, my friends." And it just moves me to my core because it really brings into focus. And I was just talking to a dad at a soccer practice this weekend who's from New Zealand and came over here, and he met all these people from India and from all these other countries. And as he's comparing stories with them about his upbringing and his fondness for cricket and other things, he's realizing how much he has in common with these people from other continents. And I said to him, I said, yeah, it's pretty amazing that the more we get to know other people, the more we realize how similar we are. And I think oftentimes we think that we're so different. So Maya Angelou is just, she's amazing.
Indeed, that's profound, Ben. Thanks for sharing those insights.
Well, thank you. Number one
is one that is new to me, and I'm actually still listening to it, emphasis being on listen, because it's not one that I've read. All the others, I confess, I have read them. This is one I'm doing on audio, and it was recently brought to my attention, and it has had mixed reviews. But the reason I chose it is because of the timing, the power of little ideas. And that's what drew me to it. I listen with it in the background, and then I pick out points I'm thinking, I can act on this one. Or maybe I should be thinking about this in a different way. And sometimes we can be so focused on the big splash, the huge splash, the disruption, that we're forgetting that the smallest action, the ripple, can make a huge difference to what we're doing. And that's relevant to innovation also, even in the business that we're in, the corporate housing, service accommodation business, is the power of little ideas.
Yeah. I would say along with the power of little ideas is also the power of small groups. And we think sometimes when we go to market with an idea or something that it has to be something where 80% of the population can use and adopt, and that's the only way to be successful. You know, there's a lot to be said for small handfuls of clients there where you deliver high value, or appealing to a niche where you're the only player in that niche, instead of going out to the market where there's tons of competitors for the 80%. So this is interesting. I'll have to check this out. Wonderful. Well, this is so insightful. Thank you so much, Veronica. I appreciate all of the insight. Thank you.
My pleasure, Ben. Thank you for this incredible opportunity to be part of the Ben Cross show, Love and Relo. It's incredible. It's amazing. When I was first reached out, I thought, wow. And I'm not disappointed. Thank you ever so much, Ben. Thank you ever so much to everyone who tuned in and asked questions. And all's well.
Yeah. Big shout out to everybody that tuned in. To echo Veronica, we couldn't have done it without you. There wouldn't be a show without you. So thank you, all of you who got involved in the comments. Hit that like button, hit that little green applause button, because Veronica definitely deserves it. We really appreciate you tuning in. Jamie says what a great show it was. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
We will be here tomorrow, same time, and can't wait to see you all back here again. Take care, everyone.